Hello, I'm Wayne Scott from Jaguar Enthusiast magazine, and I'm here at the headquarters of JLR on the test track here, where they test all of the brand new JLR products, both on the big motorway circuit and on the rough road testing areas as well. And we've had a brilliant day because I've been driving some of my heroes, some of the heritage fleet from Jaguar Classic and the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust. And this is all about understanding where Jaguar have come from, the history of the marque, and how the test drivers and the engineers have used these cars to instruct Jaguar's future. This is the first of the cars, the earliest here, XK140, of course, beautiful mid-1950s example of the XK and what Jaguar were doing in that heyday of all of their Le Mans wins, of course. That wonderful XK engine, the slightly more roomy version of the XK120 that was launched in 1948. If you take this car's predecessor, the XK120, that arrived in 1948, was shown to the public at the first motor show to happen after the Second World War. And it was the first time that Jaguar had their own running gear, their own engine. Of course, the XK engine that had been developed during those fire watches during the Second World War. And there were some eyebrows raised at that period in history as well. Could Jaguar really build their own engine? Did they have the talent and the infrastructure to deliver that? Well, of course, at the 1948 Motor Show, they proved that they did. And the car, the XK120, that they didn't think they would put into production through the sheer volume of people wanting them, of course, they ended up making them right the way through into the 1950s. The XK140 then followed it and took it to the next level. Right the way through Jaguar's history, all sorts of different changes have had different receptions from different groups of people. And when the E-Type was replaced with the XJS in 1975, it was another shocking moment for the Jaguar faithful. Back then, it was seen as a totally radical departure from the Jaguars of old. It was totally different to the E-Type that came before. It pandered more than ever to the needs of the American market. And probably the only thing that the XJS didn't have to cope with, that perhaps the modern Jaguars have to cope with, was the trial by social media. Instead, the motoring journalists of the time had a very mixed response, but in time, this would be in production for nearly a quarter of a century and be one of Jaguar's biggest selling models. So very important that it's here as we look to the future of Jaguar by experiencing its past. And some more of the cars are just over here. The first one I drove today was this, the V12 E-Type. This is one of the very last ones, and the last ones were all in this kind of somber black, really to explain the fact that the E-Type's years were coming to an end. The Series 3 V12 E-Type, often referred to as the ugly duckling of the E-Type for many, many years, has actually started to have its own sort of moment in the sun, if you like, and very much a sought-after part of the classic lineup of Jaguars. And this was the first one I drove today. Absolutely loved it. That V12 engine, that wonderful exhaust note, still something that you can savour to this day. Over here we have Series 1 XJ6, big departure for Jaguar when it arrived, first seen in 1968, of course. Still with that XK-derived engine under there, but of course the Series 1 XJ6 was a more compact, slightly more performance-focused version of the Mark 10 and the 420Gs, the really big saloons that Jaguar had been producing through the 1960s. Of course, it had the performance aspects of the Mark 2s, the S-Types, the 420s as well, all wrapped up into one package. And it would take Jaguar all the way through until the end of 2019 with the XJ Saloon, a real legend of the Jaguar lineup here. And further along in the lineup is the legend that started what many people think was peak Jaguar, of course, the Jaguar E-Type. It arrived in 1961, was launched at the Geneva Motor Show in March of that year, and still remains the most iconic classic car, probably the most iconic car ever built. Wonderful stories surround these cars, of course. Stories of Bob Berry taking the first prototype down from Coventry, followed by a dash by Norman Jewis to get the car there in a rush when they ran out of spots for the press to try this car for the first time. The old cliche that this was the car that Enzo Ferrari said he'd wished he'd designed. And all of those stories that surround the E-Type, of course, have given it that mystique over the years. And this has been part of the fleet that we've driven today, flat floor, so very early Series 1 E-Type. And we're here for a reason, because all of these cars, all of these moments in Jaguar's history are all cars that the development team for Jaguar's new GT, X900 as it's called internally, Type 00, the concept car that you will have seen. These are the cars that the development guys here at Jaguar have been driving, have been learning, have been pulling apart and have been doing all sorts of different tests on to try and understand what it is that makes a Jaguar a true Jaguar. Why does it drive a certain way? Why does it invoke a certain emotion in us enthusiasts? And how can they take all of the things they've learned from these heritage cars and use them to create the Jaguar that is an electric car for the future? Well, they settled on one particular classic Jaguar that they thought embodied all of the spirit of the cars I've just walked you through. Let's go and have a look at it now. Well, of all the classic Jaguars we've been driving here at Gaydon today, this was the car that Matt Becker and his team of development engineers and drivers settled on as their interpretation of peak Jaguar. This was the car that they all homed in on and decided that the characteristics of this were what they wanted to reproduce in Jaguar's electric future. It is, of course, an XJC, an XJ Coupé, V12 engine underneath the bonnet of this. And it was really a response to the changing market, mainly in America, of course, where people were going away from soft-top cars. There was a real need, a desire for a hard-top car with luxury, with space, but also with that performance edge as well. And this was Jaguar's answer to it. And it was quite a difficult car to put together. The doors, for example, are 4 inches longer than the standard XJ6. And of course, it has this wonderful pillarless coupe design where when you have the windows wound down on a sunny day, there is no gap, there's no pillar, there's no obstruction to the long flowing lines of the XJ Coupé. There was all sorts of development problems with these cars. For example, they spent a long time trying to get these rear quarter lights to seal properly. And of course, to make the whole car look like a finished package in two-door form. And they achieved that. It was announced to the Motor Show in 1973, made only in relatively small numbers. Just over 10,000 were produced of the XJ Coupé. And of course, also gave rise to the broad speed races that we saw towards the end of the mid-1970s. But the team here at Jaguar really loved the idea of this car because it had that performance edge, it has the luxury of the XJ saloon within it, and it has those lovely low rakish lines that you can already see in Jaguar's brand new prototype. And so they drove this car on the development test track here at Gaydon at JLR's headquarters. They took all sorts of data from it, but they also took what they felt about the car. It's been a quite emotional experience for the engineers in them living with the car and just understanding how it feels day to day, how it makes them feel, and how then they can translate that feeling into Jaguar's electric future. One of the phrases that comes up a lot amongst the team is about performance or power in reserve. And what they identified in the XJ Coupé was its ability to feel very powerful, very torquey, like you had all sorts of performance around you, but that actually you didn't need to use all of it all of the time. It was there if you needed it, there to access when you could be bothered. Mainly, you're just chilled and reclining back in your comfy leather chair. And so that brings us to Jaguar's brand new prototype, of course, the Jaguar GT. And here we have the two cars side by side to see some of the differences, some of the similarities, and some of the traits that the team here at JLR have been working on translating from this car over to this design. Now, to look at it on the face of things, they are completely radically different. But actually, if you scratch the surface, if you look a little bit closer, there are some big similarities. There's the long bonnet, for example, straight away. There's this area that designers in car manufacturing call the luxury space, the gap between the middle of the front wheel and where the legs of the driver end. They're similar dimensions as a proportion of the overall car between the XJ Coupé and the new Jaguar GT. As you move further back, that lovely vinyl roof here on the 1970s XJ Coupé, and also that translated, that line of that pillarless coupe shape translated into this low, rakish silhouette that we see here on Jaguar GT. The power in reserve comes from the 1,000 horsepower from its 3 electric motors that the Jaguar GT is using, and that gives that similar kind of feeling to having all the performance you need, but only when you need it. What's also striking is that actually for a very long car, all XJs, the XJ Coupé, much like the later X300s and X308s of the 1990s, of course, whilst they're a long car and there's lots to them, actually the cabin is relatively small. It's cosseting. It gives you a kind of cuddle as you're going down the road. And they've translated that into the new Jaguar GT. For a car of nearly over 5 meters long, really, in its length, you've got a relatively small window here. You've got a small access point. And when you sit in it, whilst there is enough room for you to feel like you're in a luxury car with space to be comfortable, it has that same cosseted feeling that you had in the XJ Coupé. It's a big car, but it feels small because it's all around you. Add to that the performance, of course, that they've managed to get out of it, that 1,000 horsepower that is incredibly tameable because it is all-wheel drive. It's got 4-wheel steering, of course, which I was really putting to the limits out on the track here in Gaydon in this wet weather, as you can see, that we've got. That really gives the performance element of this car. And round to the back, that lovely rakish rear line that you see on both the XJ Coupé and Jaguar's new GT. The final detail that's quite difficult to see when you're sort of stood next to the car or crouched down around it, as I am at the moment, is actually from plan view, from seeing the car from above. But you can just see it. The camouflage is disguising it a little bit. If you look at the back of the XJ Coupé here, you'll see the way that the rear wings taper in almost to a point at the back, and that is silhouetted exactly in Jaguar's new GT, this wonderful tapered back end to a very abrupt vertical ending, just like the original XJ Coupé. So the dynamics of the Jaguar GT and the way it relates to the old Jaguars, that traditional Jaguar feel, are more than just making things look roughly similar. They're about the emotional experience of driving the two cars. And actually here today, comparing the XJ Coupé from this one, the mid-1970s, and then jumping straight out of that and into Jaguar's new GT prototype here, I really get the sense that the Jaguar people here, the JLR development engineers, have understood Jaguar. And the thing that stood out to me the most that proved that today, there was that only after 2 laps of driving this car, it felt like I'd owned it for 10 years. Everything felt familiar, and crucially, everything felt Jaguar.